Hi everyone, welcome back to the studio. I am going to walk through our standard coffee travel mug with our extension on it. So the travel coffee mug, just take this out here, just give you a little tour of this jig here. Our travel coffee mug, which makes, I'd say about a 10 to 12 ounce coffee mug, standard for cup holders. Okay, so this is the height for a standard. This is unfired, but my clay shrinks about 10%. So it'll be a really nice handheld, one-piece, drinkable travel coffee mug. What I would like to do is use this travel coffee mug jig, add the extender, and make it a large that I can put a handle in. So it will be a travel one-piece. We'll see the same top as this. The only difference is it'll be a few inches taller, and I am going to attach a handle on this one. So if someone wants a larger travel mug, we've got them covered. So what we are going to do is add our extender piece, which comes like this. And this key is different than our normal key because this key will slide all the way through, and it has a nesting join that will go right in here. So I am going to show you how to put these two jigs together, and then I'm going to show you how you can use this jig while the clay is on to put on different kinds of texture. So let's start with assembling. You're going to want to match up the keyholes, okay? And I like to just kind of rock one side in. It doesn't matter which side. You can do the back and front. I like to match up the keyholes like this and then tilt it in, and it should snap in nice and seamlessly. So now we have our extender present, and then I like to take the original key and keep it at the top. So I'm going to put it in our neutral position. Remember, our jig has two different positions. You always want to start in the outer position where you can see the key, and then when you are removing the jig, you are going to take it to the inner position, and that is what shrinks your jig. So for this, we are going to start in the outer key position. And as you can see, this is pretty sturdy, but I like to add this extra key in the bottom. This one will be a little bit looser because we want this to be able to come in and out, so you have access to remove both sides at all times. So that goes in there. You'll see it'll kind of rock up position there. Easy to take it in and out. I like to set it all the way up until it butts against the other key. Now we have our firm structure. Okay, so and if this key slides in and out a little bit, don't sweat it. Once you get pressure on it, you'll be able to do just fine there. Okay, so I have a completely clear slab here, which I don't know most hand builders who don't add some texture. I know you're out there, so I see you if you're out there. But for most of us, the beauty of hand building is the ability to add a detail and texture to a slab. And most people will do this with a rolling pin. Let me just grab one here. So this is just a tiny one. I have all different sizes. So most people will take a textured rolling pin and roll it in. But every once in a while, you will come across texture that's in a flat sheet or that's maybe coming from a different material, and you want to add it in. So at this point, I could very well press it in at this point, or I'm going to show you how you can also add texture in while your slab is adhered to the jig, and the jig gives you a ton of structure. This is especially good if you're using an individual stamp, which I will also show you, because then you have your cup in hand, and then you can see where on the clay you're working with, okay? Sometimes when we put the texture on the whole thing, you don't always know where the texture is gonna land once you start assembling your piece. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to just pull out some different size stamps here, and these are just from my local hobby shop. Some people make their own stamps, and I think that's great. Okay, so now I've got all different kind of textures. I'm going to show you how all of these can be used while our slab is built onto our jig. Okay, so I have cut this slab mostly by eye. You want at least about a 7-inch. I went just a little bit over, but your finished after you're done stamping should be about 7 inches. This jig is just over 7 inches tall. So I'm going to put the slab in front here, and then I'm going to put my jig behind, and this is how I like to set up. I like to work front to back like this. So I'm going to tilt up my slab, and this slab is pretty stiff here. You can see that it sets up nicely on its own. Okay, and then I'm going to start the process of wrapping and measuring. So I can already tell you that this is a little bit too big for me here. So before I do any measuring and cutting, I want to make sure that I bring my slab in, and I want to hug it up really close to the jig, okay? So I am going to make sure that this inner part is snug, and then I'm going to bring this outer part, and I will make a cut. I might be able to get this in one cut. It might take me a couple cuts. And at this point, you could take it off, maybe come in here and measure and cut, but I'm going to eyeball it, and I'm gonna see if I can get close enough. So make a nice straight cut down as straight as I can, and I'm following the angle because we want this to nestle in nice and tight. So my angle wasn't quite right, so I'm gonna just pull it out a little bit, and I'm gonna make that solid cut, and my angle is matching, so that will come in and lay nice and flat. Okay, so now that I've got my clay measured, I'm going to do what I believe is the most important step, which is apply cornstarch, and I'm going to do this liberally, okay? This is a step where I don't think that you can overdo this part. There will be a lot of cornstarch on here, and that's just for ease of removal. This will come off, most of this will come off as we are sponging and detailing. The rest can burn off in the kiln as an organic material, or if you choose, you can go ahead and clean up and wipe up the additional before you fire your piece. So now I've got my jig set, I've got my slab set, no texture on this yet. We're going to bring it, and I've already scored the edges, and now I just need to line up at the bottom, add my vinegar slip here, make this slippy in my deep grooves, and then I'm going to adhere this. So you can see as it hugs, you can use the jig as a contact point, and I'm just hugging and closing the seam. And I'm rocking a clean finger up and down this seam here, and then I am going to flip this over. I have access to both sides. It's super lightweight, so I can flip this jig around and have access to all of my seams. I'm gonna come in here with the dry finger, and I'm going to make sure that I'm really pressing down on this seam there at the side. This will be our bottom, so I'm gonna come through and just go with the flow, go with the direction of the seam here, make sure my bottom's nice and snug, and I'm going to erase that seam mark there, and I'm gonna give it just a little squeeze to make sure I'm separating the clay from the jig. Now there's plenty of cornstarch, so we shouldn't have an issue, but I don't like to smush the clay in too much there. And then I'm gonna come and I'll show you what our seam here looks at the side. So we have, whoops, let me get this top part here. So what I like to do is when I have what I believe is a personal issue in my pottery, I like to try to solve the problem. If there's something aesthetically that I'm not crazy about, I like to solve that problem. For me, a problem that I had was this really big bump here. It can come to a point. So with our jig, I'm able to just turn it onto its side, give it a good amount of pressure because I'm not gonna lose my cylinder shape here. Good amount of pressure, and that starts to really smooth that seam. So I would go before and behind it. And this is also, I wanted to show you this, that if you apply your texture before this, it's perfectly okay. But this is one of those steps that you might lose a lot of your texture in, which you have then two options. You can come in and re-put the texture on the seam, which is fine, or you can do all of this work first and then come in and lay in your texture, okay? So as you can see, it makes this seam almost invisible. You can come in, because we're not ruining our texture doing this, and kind of smooth this. I personally like to come in with my rubber shaping tool, and I like to accentuate that seam. I just follow the natural bump of it. I like the way that looks. I like that that gives me a spot that I can put my handle on, or that my hands fit in nicely. And I like to accentuate the handmade nature of that. As you can see, as we rolled this, this bump is getting smaller and smaller. And you can really just work on that bump until it's as thin as you want. And then any clay that you're displacing up, you can bring in your knife And you can use the jig as a guide and just kind of make that top nice and even and nice and smooth. As you smooth this bump, it will displace clay. It's just the nature of it. Clay has to go somewhere if you're putting pressure on it, out or up. And because we have this rigid inner core, it's not going to go in. And because I am managing it with my hands, it's not going to go in a direction that I'm not expecting. I know that this clay is going to go out and up. So coming in here, this will be my drinking lip, but I want you to take a really close look at that. See how minimal that seam is now compared to the bump before? And if I was still really not happy with that profile, I could really work this. And all the while as it's separating from the jig, because as you roll it, it will separate a little bit. You're just kind of smushing it back in. Now here's the fun part. This is what I wanted to show you here. I have now made a couple bumps, a couple scuffs and oops here, but I'm going to add texture, and so I'm not too worried about that. I want to show you at this point, I could come in and I could take a rubber stamp, and I'm holding this just with one hand. It is so lightweight. You can see it also very easy to remove. It's so lightweight, but because of this, I can hold it and I can manage it and manipulate it, and I'm not losing my perfect speed, my perfect cylinder in there, okay? So if I wanted to take this, and just design-wise, I wanted to lay in this little stamp here. I can do this. I can rock this stamp back and forth. And I can lay in my texture. So if you're a little light on an area like I just was, you just come back. It's a little harder to do on camera, but I'm applying a fair amount of force. And you can see I'm getting that beautiful impression from this stamp, and I am not losing my shape. I am doing this clay is the consistency you would use where it's not too wet to hand build, but also you don't want it so dry that it's cracking. So this clay is relatively wet. I'm gonna come in here with this tiny stamp, same thing. I'm gonna use the inner core as a structure, and I'm able now to design and add in my stamps as I see fit, okay? So I can use big stamps, I can use small stamps. I could even let this set up a little bit and then do some carving in here with my diamond core carving tools. I like to do a lot of carving. I do a vine pattern. That's something that you'll see a lot on my work. So I can come in here and I can lay in. I'll do my little stem there. I can come in and I can now lay in this vine pattern while I'm holding this cup in hand, so I know exactly where this pattern is gonna show up. I don't have to do any guesswork on my slab. See, how beautiful is that? So I can come in and I can do a ton of detailing here. Now, I'm going to remove some of this texture that I put on because I'm going to show you some bigger texture options that you have with this. Okay, it's not going to be perfect. This was just for demonstrations, and I'm likely not going to be able to get enough clay off to remove my vine, and that's fine. But I'm going to come in, kind of erase. So if you make a mistake, you can just come in here. You use this sponge as an eraser, and now you have a nice blank canvas to work with again, okay? And all the while, I'll stand this up for you. See how nice and in shape my cylinder still is? There's not really another way that you can handle this as easily with such a lightweight core that gives you the freedom to decorate in hand while your clay is still wet like this. So I'm going to go ahead and show you what this looks like to add texture on. So we've got our stamps that we tried. Now I want to show you a texture with a doily, and I want to show you a texture with a texture mat. This is a fondant mat that I found at the Hobby Lobby. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to maybe start halfway here, and then we'll put the doily here so you can see it. We'll go through both textures and you can see what that looks like. So I'm going to take my jig with my wet clay in hand. I'm going to pick a spot here. Let me make sure. I might be out of frame for just a minute, but it'll come back in. And then I'm going to apply a good amount of pressure when I do this, okay? You can add cornstarch if you want, but I'm going to roll, and you'll see laying in a really nice texture. And I'm going to put my hands, because it's hollow on both sides, I can take this, and then I need to see how much space I have. I still have a little more room over there. And then if you start at the seam, you can kind of know where you're starting and stopping, okay? So texture mat onto my doily, and then I can have control over how deep this impression is gonna be, okay? So now we have our doily impression here, and then I have got my honeycomb impression here. So I prefer the honeycomb. I could get deeper with the doily if I'm right over top. So as I'm filming, I'm pushing a little further away than I would normally be working. If you are right on top of it, you're able to get this texture right in there. So I'm gonna come through this right over this texture mat, right from the inside. I see people, they find like hallway mats or shoes or, you know, just we're finding texture everywhere. So this is just a really easy way, how cool is that, to just roll in this texture. And that gave it, I don't know how I did that, but I made a little star, and I think that's really beautiful. So I think maybe if you push it to the right side, you can get a really nice star imprint. So there is my texture for that. So I just wanted to show you that there's a couple different ways here to add texture onto your slab while it's on the jig. I think that's just another added benefit. And then you have options to use different textures. You can add combinations of textures. I have a few different mats that look like this, so I can roll a couple different mats, and I can do that.